Last question before we get out. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about the House settlement. When it goes into effect, so this is the question from a Nebraska fan, but it's fair. When the House settlement goes into effect, how will non-football schools like Creighton be impacted? Could they spend the whole $20 million on basketball since they don't have a football team to worry about? I will begin the answer to that question. Do. Nebraska could, in theory, spend all $20 million on the basketball team. They're not going to do that because they do have a football team to worry about. What I would say is that the thought process will be that the Big East basketball schools can spend more money on revenue sharing because they don't have a football team. Mm-hmm. The question becomes, where does the money come from? Because a lot of these athletic departments aren't running a big profit. They're not. The most profit, surplus, whatever you want to call it, revenue, budget something. They don't like saying the word profit. That's fine. The athletic departments that run a surplus are typically football programs. Here's why. Because where the revenue comes from is football stadium and conference TV package. Mm-hmm. And that's something that Big East schools don't have. Connecticut is the only FBS football program, and Connecticut's getting about 11,000 people a game. So the question then becomes, what do these basketball first schools, and UConn kind of is too, what do they do? Like, do they say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z? Where does the money come from? And I think at Creighton, there might be a little bit more money that's available. I think that, Tom Chattel had a column on Monday and $5, $6, $7 million. I don't think men's basketball at Nebraska will have that figure, but they also it's got to come from somewhere. Like, are they running a big budget surplus at Creighton Athletics? We don't know because it's a private school, but I would be surprised if it were $20 million, that they had $20 million in revenue to give to the student athletes every year. And so it's got to come either from the university side in the form of, whatever, which they can do under the House settlement, or it's got to come from boosters who are giving the money, and then the money gets they give the money in general funds to the university athletic department, and then the money gets redistributed.
It's like money laundering for rev share.
It's not money laundering. It's all fair.
It's all legal.
It's all fair. Under the settlement, it's fair.
Yeah.
You can do all these things. The revenue can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from your media deal. It can come from anywhere. And so we don't know if it's going to be approved. It goes up for approval on April 7th. And the two big questions, well, there's many big questions hanging over this thing, but one of them is the basketball question. What about the basketball teams? My response to that is I think that'll get worked out better than you think, in part because a lot of the football schools have support systems and other things that, because they have football, make the life of a basketball player better. Best way to put it. Okay, Creighton Athletics has a better basketball program than Nebraska, no question. Nebraska has that training table inside that football building, and everybody gets to eat at it. And that's a hell of a thing. That is a sweet, sweet thing. And there's other things that Nebraska Athletics has that's true because the football program's brought in so much money, and that's a carryover effect to the other teams. Like Nebraska women's basketball hasn't lost anybody in the portal. I think maybe the volleyball team did. I can't remember, but they retain a lot of their athletes because Nebraska's a good place to go. If you want to go there, man, you don't see a ton of people leaving in sports other than football, and then in men's basketball they can leave but you haven't seen anybody leave yet out of Nebraska. So there's that. And then the second big question is how will they police the NIL, third-party NIL deals that are supposed to be vetted at $600 or more? Because the concern as we go into this process is there's revenue sharing, but NIL will continue unabated because the NCAA is abdicating its responsibility and the power conferences are not going to police it very well because it's just going to be the Wild West. And so everybody's going to have vetting, but the vetting is not going to be real. It's going to be, whatever. And then along they go, which means that you're going to have the revenue sharing money. And then, Evan, you're going to have another $12 million or whatever in NIL that's vetted, but it isn't vetted, and it's such a shadowy thing too, because the reality is everybody's throwing around liar's poker. Nobody really knows what the hard and fast numbers are because no one is subject to an audit. And then so long as you're not subject to that, how do you know? And, people telling a recruiting website, well, this is what's happening, that's fine, but until you put names to the sources, then they don't have to prove it. They don't have to prove it. So it's a tricky deal. It's a hard one to try to navigate, and I don't know exactly how it's going to turn out. I think in basketball, Nebraska will be better than people think in terms of competing for portal players, in part because of the things I just mentioned, and for a variety of reasons. I don't think Nebraska is going to be completely bereft. That's my point.
As it pertains to basketball, would it not? If there was this perception that Nebraska was playing from behind in terms of NIL, then this would just sort of bring them even with the field, generally, depending on how much they decide to put toward basketball specifically.
Right, which we don't know yet.
So I think that's where that doesn't put them ahead because everyone's going to be operating on the same budget, but maybe it helps close the gap and keeps them in contention for some talent that they didn't otherwise have. The other question I would add, up
until July 1st, you can do all the NIL you want.
Which is why you've seen all the money.
Which is why Indiana's gonna bring some players.
Sure.
They'll have money, but after that, you're not supposed to be able to do it.
I would just add too to broaden that, just the breakdown in general. So how much goes to football? How much goes to basketball? Where does volleyball fit in at Nebraska? That's a unique question to Nebraska that other schools aren't going to have to deal with.
How much better can Nebraska be?
Does it help them? I don't know that it helps them be more dominant. Nebraska.
I'm not saying that they shouldn't get their share of revenue sharing. I think what I'm saying is that if Nebraska chooses to share revenue with the volleyball program, I think Nebraska will get the best players every year. Or the best, relative.
Sure.
Okay, again, we always have to use that word relative. There's probably some gal that's growing up in Sheboygan that wants to go to Wisconsin. My point being that, Nebraska will get the players it wants because I think they would be a leader in revenue sharing. Mm-hmm. At this moment, it would be hard for me to foresee, although I could be wrong, Texas saying, well, we have football, we have Sean Miller in basketball, we got Vic Schaefer in women's basketball, and they're in the Final Four. 3 big-time programs right there. We got baseball, which is a gold standard,
Mm-hmm.
15,000 or whatever they have at their field. Now we better make sure that there's, somehow another extra million for volleyball. And then you're taking away from what I would call the 4 largest sports at that school.
Mm-hmm.
And baseball down there is a whole different thing than even Nebraska up here. So you know what I'm saying? If you look at Nebraska's peers, would Louisville do that? Maybe. I don't know. Do I think Jeff Brom is going to be like, no, I don't think so. Or Pat Kelsey or Jeff Walls at the women's basketball team? I don't think so. Is Penn State going to do that? James Franklin? James Franklin's a good guy, but do you think James Franklin's going to be like, I want to? Now they could say volleyball over women's basketball. I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah.
And that would be legit. Okay, so there might be 4 teams that do it, but Nebraska would be one of those. I just don't know. And then there's the flip side of the coin of how much better if Nebraska women's basketball team had a couple million, what can they do?
Mm-hmm.
Players like playing for Amy Williams. They do. They do. They don't have a lot of players leave.
Right.
They haven't had anybody leave. You know what I mean? So people like playing for her. Her players do. In the same token, what if they were able to get 5 of the top 50 players in the country? What would that do to her program? Well, it'd probably make it better. So I don't know. That's the $120 million question for Troy Dannon and Haven Fields. And Matt Rule's a generous guy, so I don't know what Matt Rule's gonna.
And the fact that it's all going to be out there, just it's going to be cold hard numbers. It's going to portray to what extent the university values these individual programs from a kind of a cold accounting sort of basis. And we've never had that before.
And
how
yet
does
the
that
whole
vary?
story's been,
That's so interesting.
what is men's basketball going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
How much does Nebraska value men's basketball? Like we're going to have a tangible number to attach to that.
And my response is, how much does Nebraska value men's basketball? Well, they built them a beautiful practice facility. They got them in a beautiful arena. They have an incredible training table that they can go to. They have their own strength people. They got their own little weight room over there. The fan support is really good. Feels like it's pretty valued. I understand that it's not Michigan State, but I mean, goodness gracious, Michigan State's done a few things in their tenure at basketball. Mm-hmm. They're a little bit better than Nebraska historically, and so maybe they're gonna get a little more support.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit better.
Did you know that the football building at Michigan State is named after Tom Izzo?
That's great.
It's the Tom Izzo football building.
Oh, that's good.
Nothing but the best for the Sparties. That story will be in the World-Herald's website tomorrow morning. That is our Pick Six podcast for this week. For Evan, I'm Sam. One of these weeks we'll get Chattel back. He'll come and chat with us maybe next week. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk a little more house settlement next week. Once we have some numbers, and maybe Troy Dan will chat a little bit more about what's going on for Evan, I'm Sam. Thanks for listening.